So this week on the Vinyl Guide, we have Ian Gillan, vocalist of the legendary band Deep Purple. How are you this morning, Ian?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, the new album is infinite or infinite, depending on how literal you take the capitalizations. The tour is the Long Goodbye Tour. All signs are pointing toward this being end of the line. Are we watching the final act of Deep Purple?
Well, the first scene of the final act, if you want to use the theatrical terminology, I think the best way I can describe it is a year or so ago, just over a year or so ago, we had, individually, everyone had a bad year health-wise. And so it was brought up in conversation. I can't remember who, the manager or somebody like that, or maybe the label or the agent, said, do you want to call it a day? And everyone said, just instant reaction was, well, yeah, okay, it's got to stop sooner or later. So, and we're all knocking on a bit. So we thought, yeah, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we called it the Long Goodbye, because, obviously everyone's reluctant to stop. But it seemed like sort of a reasonable thing to do at the time. Of course, now everyone's feeling much better this year, so we want to carry on. So I'm not really sure how long it's going to last, to be honest. We gave a hint in the title of the tour, but nobody wants to be definitive, so that's the state of play at the moment. We're all feeling much better, and the band is cranking, so it seems we'll carry on for a little while longer.
So I'm so glad to hear you say that. The new album is killer. It's great to hear you guys back in top form. Currently, right now, your tour is winding up in the U.S. leg, then going on to Europe, the U.K., and ending the year in South America. So I imagine there's going to be some more dates that are going to be announced for 2018?
Yes. Yeah. 2018 was never in doubt. I think that I've seen also outline plans for Russia and the Eastern Hemisphere, which will take us from Japan, China, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, down to Australia, basically, and Indonesia, down to Australia. And I've already seen some summer festivals in Europe penciled in. And there's even talk of another album. So I guess we might have a few writing sessions, that sort of thing, for next year.
Eventually, when you guys do start to call it officially a day, what is in your mind in terms of how the final Deep Purple gigs would look like?
Well, there's nothing planned. And in my mind, I would rather finish unexpectedly with my, it suddenly, well, yeah, that's it. Let's just stop.
Mm-hmm.
I think accelerating to a sudden halt is, I don't know. How can you plan an ending? I mean, in most regular jobs, you just retire on a certain date and you know it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, it's a different kind of thing. If you're fit and strong and performing well, nobody would want to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And these things they happen suddenly. So, I don't know. I've already got solo tours and albums planned anyway for my retirement. So, it's not going to stop in that sense. As long as you can do it, then I guess we will. Nothing is planned. Nothing is planned.
So your plan is to actually keep doing it until you drop. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. I visited Boot Hill once in Tombstone, and they all died with their boots on. So I thought, yeah, that's kind of appealing to me.
They'll have to carry you off the stage.
Or scrape me off. Yeah.
So going back a few years, what album changed your life as a young man?
Oh, there are so many. There are so many. Ella Fitzgerald with Wes Montgomery, Art Tatum and Roland Kirk, Elvis's first album, Little Richard's first album. They weren't albums as we know them now. They were more collections of songs. You put out so many singles, and all of a sudden the label would put them together in a collection, and that would become an album. That's how albums were in those days. Then changed my life. That's a big thing, Things that stick out. Edgar Winter's Entrance album, amazing. Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, unreal. Very significant, yeah. Simon and Garfunkel, first album. Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers, amazing. Yeah, that big influence on me. But I could go on and on and on.
Was there a particular song or performer that when you saw them as a young man, you said, that's exactly what I want to do?
Hundreds of them, yes. I soaked everything up in my formative years. I think most musicians do. You do that until you find your voice. And after that, you tend to be more concerned with developing from an inner position rather than absorbing any more, because that becomes difficult. Once you find your voice as a vocalist or an instrumentalist, so to speak, it changes you. That's when your life changes. For me, that happened when I joined Deep Purple, and I think that happened for the musicians in Purple too. John, Ritchie, Roger Pace, and myself all found our voices at the same time, and so the human, the human chemistry was sensational, and all of those elements with which each of us were influenced came into being at one time through the voices of the members of the band. So you suddenly had, this is where Infinite comes into play. The band was born, but members of the band included Beethoven and Chopin and Hendrix and Ray Charles and Woody Guthrie. And
it's like the sum of all your influences is what you're saying.
That happens at the same time, yes. It happens rarely in life. But, it happens to everyone, but it rarely happens to 5 people at the same time. And that was the chemistry of Deep Purple. And so we had everything from orchestral composition, jazz, blues, soul, folk music, rock and roll, reggae, and humor. Lots of humor. Being based in the UK, humor was a huge part in our lives. And so we've been laughing our way through through world tours, and we still are. It's very, very funny band to be in the dressing room with or on the plane with.
When you think about all the music and the album projects you've been involved in, which is your favorite?
Again, impossible to. If you ask me that tomorrow, I'll give you a different answer. That's because music is what it is. I listen to different music at home. I rarely listen to rock music because it's not sustainable to me in listening terms. Performance terms, yeah, great. I love to see balls to the wall performances like that. But changed my life, did you say?
Well, yeah, if you want to summarize your musical statement, if you want to hold up one of your records as the one that you are perhaps most proud of.
There's no such thing, mate. No such thing. I can give you highlights. Deep Purple in rock, highlight. It was the first. It was loud, rebellious, and took no prisoners. Fireball, the second album, was equally important because it gave us a chance to show the other side of the band, and that was priceless. Fireball, although it freaked everyone out because it wasn't the same as Deep Purple in rock. Everyone likes you to be the same every time, but it wasn't. There was too much to Deep Purple to get onto one album. In my life, Jesus Christ Superstar, that was strangely, it only took 3 hours, but it turned out to be, it brought another side of my vocals out that helped me in future years. Perfect Strangers, I think, was pretty important because of the reunion. And the last 2 albums have been hugely important because for the first time we've really settled down with a producer, Bob Ezrin, and it's been amazing. and I think achieved the best sound that Purple's ever had. It's also reminded us of the kind of things that are important. You get kind of shoved around a bit by the record industry in terms of expectation, but Bob encouraged us to develop ideas and retain the texture and dynamics of the music, to extemporize on a theme. This is something we haven't done for a long time. And so there's a lot of music that's kind of over 5 minutes long. Some of it's 7 or 10 minutes long. And I think that's been very important to us. That's brought us back to recording the kind of things that we perform on stage with a lot of improvisation and that sort of thing. So those are the highlights that I can think of today. But as I said earlier, if you ask me that tomorrow, I'll give you different answers. As I did in Japan once to a journalist who came in, she was a translator, asked me what my favorite album was, question number 3, and I gave her the answer of maybe Machine Head. And she came back half an hour later representing another magazine and asked me the same question with a straight face, and I said, Fireball. And that's when she fell to pieces completely because she just couldn't take it that I'd given her 2 different answers to the same question.
So do you have an album in your catalog that you would like to revisit or perhaps redo?
No. No, it is what it is. I never listen to them anyway. No, absolutely not. No, I don't think that would achieve anything.
So going to a period of your career, you did the album with Black Sabbath, Born Again, and it's a very polarizing album. Some people love it, some people can't stand it. Where do you fall in that?
Well, if you take it cold and you didn't know the musicians, and you had no adherence to either band, no allegiances or any of that emotional nonsense that would sway you other than music, then I put it pretty highly. It's in my top 5 albums of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mention it earlier, but as I said, if you ask me that tomorrow, I will tomorrow. Just because I forgot about it. Yeah, I love it. And I love working with Tony.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the final production was pretty sad. It was overloaded with bass and kind of muffled.
Do you think we'll ever hear a remix of that album?
No. I've got tapes, I've got cassettes of monitor mixes that sound 10 times better than the album. But they'll never get used. I don't know where the masters are even. I don't know who's got them.
Yeah, that seems to be the big complaint about the record is not the songwriting, nothing to do with the performances, but just the mix. So I'd love to hear if that's underway or that's a thought in anyone's head of going back and remixing that record.
There's no cohesion on the business side either way. So I don't know who would even instigate something like that, or where the multi-tracks are. I mean, it was all analog in those days.
Mm-hmm.
No, I wouldn't hold out any hope for that, although he could certainly do with it. But when I listen to songs like Trashed, which I have done recently, it sounds amazing. So maybe my ears were just disappointed at the time. I don't know. Or it could be that people have been listening to early digital transfers. I nearly wept into my beer when I heard Machine Head for the first time on a CD. It was so awful because the producers and engineers had no idea how to remaster in those days. It's something that took them at least 10 years to do properly. And so it's just a flat transfer. And if you got a CD from those days, you wonder why anyone would ever have bought anything that sounded that awful.
Is vinyl your preferred listening format?
No. Any high quality product from the studio would be okay. And CDs, as I said, by the time you got into the 90s, the first CDs were in 82, and the albums and music that was recorded digitally in the first place isn't too bad, but the albums that were transferred and copied from earlier dates for record label catalogs, for example, were truly awful. By the time you get into the 90s, the engineers are getting the hang of it, and
they knew what they were doing by then.
Yeah, it still didn't contain the depth of sound that you would get from an analog recording, but more recent. And so there was always this mixture. People were recording analog and mixing digital, and that was a compromise which improved things. People are much better now, but so any high quality recording on any medium is okay with me. What I can't stand, I won't even bother listening to MP3s or anything like that. I mean, except for work demonstration records and stuff like that. But that, to me, that's just pointless. It's just that's so retrograde in quality. That goes back to scratchy music of the 40s. You know, it's almost that quality without the scratches.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier you're not sure what happened to the Born Again Masters or where that would be. There are a lot of Ian Gillan and Gillan Band LPs that were out there recorded and distributed on various labels many years ago. A lot of those labels haven't survived. Do you still know where some of those tapes are? Do you retain the rights for those LPs?
Everything that wasn't released was destroyed, and still is. I wipe every tape or erase everything if it's not used at the end of a session.
Why is that?
It's not meant for release, so why would anyone ever be able to hear it? Why should anyone ever be able to hear it? It's not up to scratch. It's not up to standard. So you destroy it. Listen, at the end of every songwriting session, I'm knee-deep in lyrics that are never used. I tear them all up. I shred them, burn them, or drown them, or whatever. But they're not meant to be used. I've got all my notes in my notebook, and I don't want people to see them because they're substandard. They're not... Why would anyone want to listen to stuff that's rubbish? They're considered substandard, so that's it. I love my vinyl records. I've got a huge collection of them. Mm-hmm. And to me, they're exciting, and they sound wonderful. I think everything in my catalog is catered for. There's as far as I know, nothing's been lost. No albums have been lost. I think they're all out there somewhere. Of course, they're all on CD now. But recently, a couple of labels, Demon, I believe, in the UK, which is a sub company from the BBC, released a huge swathe of vinyl of my stuff, and they sent me a box. It's all at home somewhere. I can't recall which albums, but about 10 of them, I think, are on there.
Sure. There's a Gillan box set. I also know recently there was a Future Shock box set as well. So a lot of the stuff is starting to be reissued. How do you feel about the fidelity of the new records versus the ones from back in the day?
Well, I find the old stuff exciting. The trouble is, it's like banjo players, as I call guitarists. If you have a guitar that is connected directly to the amplifier on stage, you're hearing a purity of sound which amplifies the ability, the personality, and the passion of the musician. If you put about 9 plugins in between those two stages, you're going to hear something that's anodyne and bland, and you say, who's playing this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the recordings in the early days were very simple. It was basically performing to a microphone or into an amplifier, and it goes on a direct line into the control room, and it's might tweak it with a bit of top end or a bit of reverberation, and then they mix it, and that was it. Then of course the producer would come along and destroy it by putting it through another two phases and making it sound muffled. So I always keep I always used to keep the monitor mixes, which sounded great. But most of it's all right, and it makes up for it by being direct and uncontaminated by clever dicks.
So it sounds like, since you destroy all the unused tapes and whatnot, there's not some treasure trove of outtakes that make it out anytime soon.
Never. Nothing exists. I've destroyed everything at source. Drowned at birth. No, I don't see the point of it. I can see people who would like to hang around the studio and hear you making mistakes and coughing and crackles and breakdowns and rehearsals and that sort of thing. But they're not for public consumption. Why should they be?
When you hear of a project like the Beatles anthology, that sort of thing, do you think that's a little bit overboard, or do you have a fascination with it as well?
No, I don't. I'm not interested in that. I got hooked on those records because they sounded great in every department: the writing, the performance, and the recording. Mm-hmm. And that's it. If you show me something, I'll tell you. I think this probably comes from my worship of Little Richard, who was probably the greatest rock singer of all time. And he recorded everything on the Speciality label, and then he parted with the label and did God knows how many re-recordings of those songs. And I bought every one for the first year or two, and I thought, this is hopeless. I mean, none of them are as good as the original. Mm. None of them. And yet, that you couldn't fault the performance. You couldn't fault the recording. It just didn't have... It wasn't the thing I heard first. And so it sounded to me substandard. So I never bought another Little Richard record again. I just played the old stuff. And had no interest in... I've got a life outside music, too. I know what I like, and I know what gives me pleasure. And... outtake, all that rehearsal, outtake rubbish. I mean, that's for the fans, and I understand it. But it's not for me.
How are you managing the legacy of yourself, your own solo work, as well as Deep Purple? Now that it's closer to the end, is there work being done regarding managing the legacy of those materials?
No.
Okay.
In a word.
Well,
No. It's done. It's done. It's out there. People want to buy the records. They buy the records. I suppose there have been one or two best of and anthologies which I've approved way back. As far as Purple's concerned, God knows what's going on there. If anything was being planned, I think there have been. I never show any interest in that stuff, as I explained earlier. It's just repackaging, representing, remarketing, upgrading, changing. It's all for the sake of, stuff that I'm not interested in. Mm-hmm. When I get a couple of weeks off the road, I'll play music all the time. But, I guarantee, unless anyone asks to hear something, when staying at my house or anything, I would never dream of playing a Gillan record or a Deep Purple record. Somebody asked me that once, and I looked around on the floor. I'd had a few buddies round for drinks the night before, and the place was in a bit of a mess before digital streaming or anything like that. So there were CDs and albums lying all over the place, and there was a mixture of Dusty Springfield, Ray Charles, my favorite flamenco guitar album, Duende Magic, a lot of African music, a lot of reggae. Mm-hmm. I used to play table tennis with Bob Marley, so I think I'm a bit biased in that sense with his music, which was pure genius in my opinion. Yeah.
So you're not
whatever.
What you're saying is you're not nostalgic.
No, I'm not.
No.
None of them. Not yet. I might be. I might become so when if I'm if I can't tour anymore or something like that. But I don't have an emotional attachment to any of this music. I love it. I love it to listen to and that sort of thing. But for me, it's, you know.
Once you're done with it, move on.
I think I'm just normal, like most people. I think there's some people that are passionate about music. In terms of being a listener, that's not me.
So, speaking of nostalgia, recently you declined participating in any Deep Purple activity with Ritchie Blackmore. And by the way, for the record, I think that's a great call. Steve Morris is fantastic. Been a fan of his for years, and I think the musicianship of the band, since he's entered, has really elevated. Plus, you guys all seem like you're getting along well. But just being devil's advocate, are there any conditions in which you would, again, share the stage with Ritchie Blackmore?
Well, you know, he's been playing minstrel music for 25 years nearly.
Mm-hmm.
He got together Rainbow for a few shows recently, and I've got some friends or acquaintances for whom Ritchie is God, you know, absolute God. They think he's not playing rock and roll like he used to. I mean, I'm putting that as kindly as I can because Ritchie and I are getting on okay these days, you know. There's no great animosity anymore. And I've publicly wished him well as often as I can. We nearly had dinner together a couple of times, but our routes weren't heading towards the same place. But, you know, the answer to your question is no. There's no reason. Mm-hmm. You know, put it this way. For all those years, you know, the wounds would have healed within a year. But if somebody keeps poking a wound, it won't heal. It won't. You keep poking it with a stick. And as far as the situation that you just presented, you know, we're happily married now. Ritchie and the band got divorced. He walked out in the middle of a tour, and, you know, the rain stopped and the sun came out for the band. Mm-hmm. It was like that. Ritchie was a difficult character. There's no denying that. And suddenly Ian Pace came alive again, and, you know, he was a happy guy. And John Lord regained his gravitas, and Roger came out from under a rock, and everyone started being their normal person again. It was a big cloud on the social and musical and professional scene. And as Ian Pace puts it best, you know, why would I go back to that misery again? And it's like somebody saying, you know, you're happily married now, but we want you to get back together with your divorced wife, with which there's been much bitterness over the years, just for the sake of the fans. You know, it's not going to happen. End of.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think a lot of people are really asking for that anyway. I think everyone's pretty much moved on, and, you know, the new music that's coming out is fantastic, so there really isn't a reason to be able to put it all together other than to have some strange nostalgia for days past. Yeah.
You know, I understand that, you know, we're publicly owned to a certain extent, but having said that, since I have joined the band in '69, we've never, ever, ever once sat down and thought, now, what can we do to please the fans? Mm-hmm. Never once, ever. And I don't say that with any lack of respect for the fans. We recognize how important and how fantastic they are. We couldn't have got by without their support. But the ethos of the band was to please ourselves and keep our fingers crossed and hope that the public would like it. But our music comes from our heart and our souls. It's not contrived. It never has been. And so, you know, it's very hard to you know, invite the fans in to make band decisions, because that's never been that way. So if they don't like it, we soon find out. But it doesn't mean to say that we didn't enjoy recording it or writing those songs. It's multifaceted, this whole thing, and it's a professional approach that we've always had. And as I say, the sense of our music was born in '69 when we all came together at that marvelous time, and that's the way we like it. So, and at the moment, we played in, I think, over 45 countries last year, and everything's going very well. So I really don't think it needs to be changed. And as you say, the nostalgia thing is not for us. Maybe I'll dig my old pipe out and cut down on my drinking one day.
So, Ian, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And again, I just want to make sure people know that the new Deep Purple Infinite is incredible. Make sure you check out this out. In fact, I may play a track right after this interview, probably Hit Boots. That's the one that I've been rocking lately. And Deep Purple is touring right now. Again, they're hitting Europe. They're hitting the UK. They're going to be hitting South America in 2017. And you just heard Ian talk about dates in 2018. So to check out those dates, deeppurple.com. Keep an eye out. Facebook.com/official Deep Purple. Sign up for that, and you'll get alerted whenever tickets go on sale around you. Make sure to see this band. It's the Long Goodbye Tour. It may be your last opportunity. Hopefully it's not, but just in case, you better go see them. Ian, thank you so much for joining us here.
It's been a pleasure. Nice talking to you. Thank you very much. Take care.